Hello all. I'd like to take a moment to quickly talk about what's happened in Syria this month. After months of negotiation, a second ceasefire of the year was agreed. That ceasefire is now in tatters. It's over already. Today, I'd like to ask, who killed the Syrian ceasefire? The ceasefire started on Monday, September 12th. On Monday, September 19th, something truly horrific happened. An aid column traveling to Aleppo was destroyed. This group of trucks carried food and other resources that were desperately needed by the suffering population of Aleppo. The Syrian civil war is an endless list of horrors, but this represents a new low. 20 civilians were killed, and the column was destroyed. Humanitarians have been attacked before, but nothing on this scale has really happened before. Both the Russians and the Syrian regime deny involvement, but there's very little question that they're the folks responsible. The story has now become that this is what ended the Syrian ceasefire. There's no disputing that it was an evil, awful thing to do, but this story leaves out something that's very, very important. 2 days before, on September 17th, U.S. fighter jets destroyed a serious component of the Syrian army. 62 Syrian soldiers were killed, according to the Russians. The anti-Assad Syrian Observatory of Human Rights claims that it was 80 Syrian soldiers that were killed. Now, this may not sound like much in a conflict that's killed almost 500,000 people, but if you're familiar with the Syrian civil war, this is a very big deal. Assad's army is fighting on dozens of fronts. They don't have that many resources. One of the largest shifts in the battle was back in 2015 when the rebels took Idlib province. That massive battle that created a tremendous change in the war only killed about 80 Syrian soldiers. This attack has been reported in all the international media. But these reports leave out just how significant this is. We basically wiped out the Syrian army's presence in this area, on that front. It's also worth pointing out that these guys were fighting directly against ISIS. So we've basically made ISIS much, much safer. Now, I have enough faith left in the U.S. government to believe that they didn't really intend to do this, that it was an actual mistake. But how are we supposed to get the Syrians or the Russians to believe that? When Assad or the Russians claim that the United States is supporting ISIS, they now have a great thing to point to. Some half-hearted apologies were made, and the story has now disappeared. And that's a real problem. Because this story has not disappeared for the Syrians and the Russians. I think it's actually very likely that the attack on the aid convoy 2 days later was a more or less direct retaliation for this attack. I'm not justifying that tragedy, that horrific act by the Assad regime, but it's important to acknowledge that that didn't come out of nowhere. But that's not the narrative. The narrative is that we can't trust the Russians, and we can't trust the Syrian regime, and now we can't ever have a political solution because they're evil and crazy. Obviously, Assad and the Russians have a very different vision of what an end to hostilities would be like, but they do want the hostilities to end as well. If we let the standard story be that Assad and the Russians killed the ceasefire, we're never actually going to be able to move forward. I think the Western media's willingness to just sort of accept the Pentagon and the U.S. government's interpretation of what happened here makes us all a little dumber and makes it more likely that this war continues for months to come and years to come. We'll never get to peace in Syria if we continue to accept the half-truths that are served up by the U.S. government and the Western media. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. And if you'd like to help me make more videos like this one, please click on the Patreon link here to find out how. Thanks.